I want to introduce our next panelists who are going to join this conversation. Katie Dykes is Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. She was appointed by Governor Ned Lamont. Previously, she was Chair of the Connecticut Public Utilities Regulatory Authority. Katie Dykes, a nice round of applause. Yeah. And Lynn Scarlett is Chief External Affairs Officer of the Nature Conservancy, where she influences climate solutions in the U.S. and 72 countries. She also serves as the Conservancy's Chief Climate Spokesperson. Previously, she served as Deputy Secretary of the Interior in the George W. Bush administration. Welcome, Lynn. Before we get to all the questions that I have about all this, I would just love the two of you, maybe Lynn, I'll start with you, to just react to some of what you just heard from Tom and maybe some things that resonate with you about the way that he's framed this conversation.
Or don't resonate.
My head is spinning. That was absolutely fabulous. But one thing that, that did come to mind is, yes, we need that mean green, no question about it, but we need the nice green too. And at the Nature Conservancy, we're looking for durable solutions for climate action. That means trying to get beyond a pendulum swinging from one administration to the other. That means you need to rebuild that moderate middle. And that means you need the nice green. You need to build those conversations around solutions rather than with the framing of, say, conquest. And so I think there's a place for both. You need that mean green, but you need that nice green. And it is that nice green space with our presence in all 50 states, very bipartisan or very nonpartisan, where we're able to reach out, for example, to shellfish growers. Shellfish growers, generally a conservative population. They have links into the forestry community, the fisheries community, and the farming community. And guess what? They are ground zero now for climate effects. Warming oceans, ocean acidification, sea level rise, they are hurting, and they see climate as the challenge. So we helped create a shellfish growers climate coalition. Started with 1, then 10, now 100. They networked out to other fishing communities. They networked out to restaurateurs. And now they're going to the Hill and saying, act now. So that's a nice voice of conversation. It's a conversation around solutions. And it's a conversation of connection that is using authentic voices who can reach those folks on the Hill who care about those people and their livelihood.
Do you feel as though the nice green and the mean green, though, can coexist? I mean, even within this presidential race, we see the several hundred Democratic candidates for president, and their supporters almost eating each other over the idea of who can get to the left, or who can get to the right, or who can get to the middle. And I'm wondering how you viewed that. Can the mean green and the nice green actually get along?
You know, it's a really perplexing question, and one that we struggle with all the time, because of course we see bad actors out there. We want to dive in, we want to engage, we want to stand up and be counted and be critical when it's needed. But how do you do that without deepening the divide and creating simply further tensions? So yes, I think it is possible, and it's possible if you center on solutions.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So if you center on solutions both with the nice green and trying to pull people into clean energy, and by the way, the health benefits it brings, but also to maybe those bad actors saying, you know what, you're part of the problem, you need to work with us and help drive towards those solutions. So it's possible, but it's tricky.
Yeah. Tom, how do you see that?
I think you're making a really good point, and I wouldn't agree. It's just really, you need to talk to different communities in different ways at different times, and you need different strategies. And when I'm focused on mean green, I'm actually more focused on big natural resource companies, less than those, you know, the fishermen in a particular community. But I think your point about how to bring them in is very, very important. I think it's about a balance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Katie, I'm wondering what thoughts were sparked by Tom's presentation?
Well, I think it's great the way you ended talking about the importance of community and connection. We work at the state level on designing markets and policies to help accelerate, technology adoption investment that's going to advance climate solutions. But that is all possible. What we're achieving is all possible because voters are making that a priority. And that's because people are joining together in communities and coalitions to ask for this, to say that they need this, that they want it, that it needs to be prioritized ahead of the other, items that are on the agenda. Working in the Capitol in Hartford, I had a legislator once say to me, we were talking about some different bills that were coming up and running through the list, and they're looking at one and look, this is an environmental, this bill, the Enviros really want it. They said, well, the Enviros, is there anyone else with them? Because the Enviros never get bills, I mean, there's exceptions, but on their own. And where we've seen that we've been able to make the most progress, it's when we've seen environmental advocates joining with labor. As we know that there's such a tremendous opportunity here for clean energy investment, for clean energy jobs that people desperately want. When we see environmentalists working together with labor and with local mayors who want that investment to happen in their town and are competing hard to make that possible. We see, now the energy coming from youth. My mom is a retired high school teacher, and she's working with kids in her high school in West Virginia, which is where I grew up, who are getting together and activating around climate change, which is something that I had never experienced when I was growing up. But just the voices of youth coming together, amplifying. You see the older folks who've been active in these fights for a long time, making space for those new voices to come forward, developing those new connections. And it's not just happening, in a labor hall or at a church basement. It's happening online. Yeah. And so I think that it's really exciting to see all of those things coming together. That's helping to really amplify and propel Governor Lamont's mission and his objectives for helping to advance climate action in our state.
And you've worked with other states, obviously in the region and around the country in this. What role can the states play? Because I think a lot of what Tom's talking about is leadership at the national level, but also leadership, including leadership that doesn't have any authority at the very, very local level. State government can sometimes fall in the middle, and states have an awful lot of things to worry about. What role do states play, do you think, and what have you seen out of states that maybe looks positive in terms of pushing this forward?
Well, I'm a big believer in the power of state government to make change and help advance and test out new models for climate solutions. In fact, I worked in the Obama administration in the first term. It was a wonderful experience. I had the opportunity to leave in 2011 and move to a state, and I jumped on it because states have so much jurisdiction, so much authority, and so much nimbleness, frankly, to be able to develop the cutting edge new models that can be adopted at the federal level. It's a great time to be in a state. We have, first of all, obviously, in the wake of the federal government stepping back in this space, state leadership is even more renewed. There's more attention. There's more support for states to be working together. We are talking to each other among states more than ever. We're sharing directly what's working. We're trying to adopt the practices that have worked well in one state to create more uniformity among our markets. We have, after the day that President Trump announced his intention to pull back from the Paris Accords, you saw governors coming together to form a climate alliance. Now more than half of the nation's governors have committed to be part of that coalition to advance climate solutions. And the great part about it is we've been doing this for years. Connecticut is a charter member of something called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. It's a living, breathing, thriving cap and invest program that the Northeast states have been implementing for many years. And the beauty of this is that we've been doing it for so long that now we can rebut the naysayers with models that have actually been proven. Over the 10 years that we've been implementing the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, our states have seen our emissions from our power sector drop by more than half. We've seen our electricity prices come down by 6% relative to the rest of the country. People said it would drive prices up. People said that implementing this price on carbon would cause blackouts. Haven't seen that happen. And at the same time, it's driven more than $3 billion in investment in our communities in more efficient energy use, driving down people's bills. And we've doubled our benefits from that investment in public health benefits. It's just fabulous. So we're just generating more and more success, but we're moving farther and faster now today.
Are the states one of the better laboratories, do you think, for this, Tom? In terms of how we come together, build coalitions, in terms of how we actually move to a green energy infrastructure?
It's the greatest advantage we have as a country. You know, that California can be doing its thing, prove a model, then enlist other states around it. And whether you have a president in Washington who wants to amplify that or one who wants to resist it is kind of too bad. So this incredible, you know, laboratory we have of 50 states and now cities also doing the same thing is a huge advantage, you know. You know, listening to Katie, I was thinking that one of the things that I'm a big believer in races to the top, whatever it is, you know, and like creating incentives and competition between states. Don't know exactly how you do that because some of these things are hard to measure and you don't want to get caught up in that. But, you know, really calling out and giving high fives to those who are doing it, creating, you know, just taking advantage of our federal system. It's one of the greatest strengths we have as a country.
Yeah, and we were talking backstage about this, Lynn, that when you were in the federal government, it was the Bush administration. You worked in the Obama administration. It was a very different administration, obviously, than this one. But you feel as though the federal government can play a transformative role if oriented the right way. And you at Interior were working with hundreds, thousands of dedicated public servants who were really aligned with the same mission that you were, that a lot of the same people in this room were.
If I just say one thing,
yeah.
You know, I think the most effective Assistant Secretary of Energy for Renewables in my time in Washington was George W. Bush's A.D. Karsner. So they had a lot of talent in that administration. Wasn't always apparent, but it was, there were a lot of good people there.
Yeah, and so what role do you think the federal government can play? I mean, we've covered states a bit, but the federal government has to sort of get out of the way to a certain extent, and it's not at the moment.
Well, you know, John, I put it differently. They must be a player. So on the one hand, absolutely correct. The states are motoring forward. In fact, they're at the climate conference of the parties right now in Madrid. We're still they're in there with that message. They are critical laboratories. The majority of states have renewable portfolio standards. We have the Northeast, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. The states are pioneering transformation in transportation, buildings, in cities. So the states are important, but we cannot get to that net zero 2050 without the federal government. We need some sort of carbon pricing so that that signal flows across the economy, because we need all hands on deck. Not just a few utilities here and there. We need all players. They need that signal. Now, by the way, carbon pricing is not the only answer, and some states like California are moving ahead, but it's not enough. So I guess I would respond to your question a little bit differently. It's not, do they have a role, can they have a role, or should they get out of the way? They must have a role. And that is precisely why we launched our 50-state strategy. It might seem odd that we launch a 50-state strategy to get federal action, but we did that because in the states, that's where you can have these experiments, you can build this collaboration, build these dialogues with the shellfish growers, and then help that ladder up so that those members of Congress begin to realize we got to act because our folks in our communities want it. I do want to add another piece to the picture, though, and it's another reflection on Tom's remarks. You know, he had his 4 zeros. I think there was a 5th zero missing, and that 5th zero is we need zero deforestation, and that is a global enterprise. But it is also one that requires federal action, both on the many public lands. You know, the Interior Department manages 500 million acres of the United States. Think about it, that's 1 in every 5 acres. You have got to manage those forests well. You've got to do it in partnership with private forest owners, both in reforestation, improved forest management, and then in collaboration with other countries in avoiding deforestation. So you've got that fifth zero, and it's nature. And that, of course, is critical to the Conservancy.
But when so much of that deforestation is happening in countries that we cannot control the politics, we cannot control what's happening on the ground, what does the United States do? United States federal government, but also citizens here. How do we tackle that problem when the rainforests are burning?
Well, you know, there are really 2 pathways. So one, of course, and Tom mentioned this as well, this is not just an enterprise for governments or communities. It's an enterprise that must engage the marketplace and corporations. So a lot of our work in trying to drive avoided deforestation, let's say in Brazil or in Indonesia, is actually working with companies on their supply chain and getting them to commit only to purchasing in systems that actually drive zero deforestation. So there's the corporate piece, but there's a federal government piece too, because, you know, a lot of these developing countries that are under a lot of stress with their landscapes really don't have the resources to invest in both climate mitigation and climate adaptation. And so influencing at the federal level where our aid dollars go can actually be part of the supporting picture too.
Katie, did you want to jump in before?
No, you know, I think that I absolutely agree. We can't achieve the goals that we need to achieve without federal leadership and federal action. And I think one of the, you know, at the state level, we're working very hard with every tool that's at our disposal. I think we're making great progress. We're working, you know, across governors on a bipartisan basis. We're also working with other countries to some extent. You think about the successes of offshore wind development. That's something that's just exploded over the last few years. A couple of, you know, 3-4 years ago, I would have told, you know, when people said, oh, we could solve our climate mitigation goals here in Connecticut with offshore wind, I thought it's just insane because the prices were so high. The lesson of offshore wind, we have an RFP that's winding up. We're poised to be making an announcement very shortly about you know, a historic opportunity for offshore wind development, and it's because the North Atlantic has been investing in this technology. We've seen companies from Germany, from Denmark, who have been bringing that technology to the Connecticut, off our shores. And we're benefiting from lower prices from that technology, bigger turbines, and we're learning from from environmental groups about how to better site these facilities to mitigate their impacts on fisheries and our ocean life. And we're, you know, just the amount of acceleration just in the Northeast states alone. Rhode Island now has 25% of their energy supply contracted to offshore wind. Massachusetts is at 13%. We're gonna be jumping up there in Connecticut. But this has happened just in the space of 2 to 3 years. So this is accelerating, and the technology transfer is crossing borders. We need the federal government because these are projects that are primarily being built in federal waters. We need the federal government to not prevent this from happening, but help to ensure that it can happen in the right way. We absolutely need that partnership and that leadership at the federal level.
And Tom, you know, we were talking about you know, the 10 years since Hot, Flat, and Crowded came out. There's a lot that's different about America. There's a lot that's different about American politics. But some of the, you know, the ideas that you had there really had to do with America taking a leadership role to get to the front of this green energy revolution. And we didn't expect that it would be as cheap as it is now. We didn't expect that we would be able to build offshore wind off of Connecticut or Rhode Island and be able to power things. That's one of the big changes. What do you see as some of the other big developments in the 10 years since you envisioned this role where America needs to take a leading role in order to make sure that we do something about climate change?
Well, I think the point you raised is number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, which is there was a time we sat around and said, if only, you know, we had scale storage with solar power. Wow, what we could do with that. That's here today. I mean, if only, you know, we could have electric vehicles that were affordable. That's here today. And so what's really missing is so much more the will, not the way to take it to scale. Look, I'm an opinion columnist. I know the Nature Conservancy is, you know, nonpartisan. I'm not. There was no good time for Donald Trump to be president of the United States. This is a uniquely bad time. Given where the climate crisis is, given where the technology is, if we were able to actually be amplifying and accelerating this rather than suppressing it and standing in the way, we would be in a totally different place today.
But Donald Trump is president, and he's president because a large number of Americans, despite the great work that Yale has done to chronicle how many people actually believe in climate change versus 5 or 10 years ago, an awful lot of people believe in what Donald Trump believes in, and they believe in something that's very different from what most of the people in this room believe in. And so I guess the question, I'll put it first to you, Tom, but this is what we want to hear from. How do we change those minds? Because Donald Trump is running for president again, and somewhere between 35 and 45% of people who go to the polls will vote for him once again, despite anything that we might be saying today.
Well, I don't want to turn this into a big political thing, but I would simply say one reason a lot of those people believe that is because we have a network that has a business model to make people stupid and to basically put them in an alternative epistemological universe where these ideas simply can't penetrate. That's a real problem. I'm sorry, there's no sugarcoating it, you know. And so I think that it means the rest of us have to simply double down. And everyone needs to read the New York Times.
Yep. A shameless plug if I ever heard one. And listen to public radio.
Yeah.
Lynn?
Yeah, so let me tell you a story. No question it's very difficult. And we need leaders who are all about climate action, no question. But let me tell you a story that we're learning from our experiences in states. So West Virginia. When we launched our 50-state strategy, West Virginia said, what? You know, we're a coal country. Oh, we can't do that. That might be controversial. But, you know, they grabbed hold of the challenge and they said, okay, what are we going to do? They teamed up local university and said, what does the future in West Virginia look like? What does the economy look like? Out of that came a report. Guess what? A report focused on clean energy and nature as an economic opportunity. All those forests for reforestation, improved forest management, the water benefits that healthy forests bring, then convened some summits, pulled in coal country. We had CEOs from coal country there. We had coal miners there. Of course, we had academics. We had local legislators, a real mix of people, the outdoor recreation community. And they began a discussion on what does our future look like? And a future not centered on the naysaying, i.e. anti-coal, but on the positive, the opportunities in reforestation, the opportunities in solar. Guess what? Reclaimed coal mine lands are great places to site wind and solar, big opportunity. So now we are getting some traction, building some conversation, people looking to the future, looking to those solutions, and then we're striving to pioneer those efforts. We do what we do well. We bought some land in coal country. Now we're looking to see if we can't actually take some of that reclaimed coal mine land, put some solar sites on it, actually invest in some reforestation and pave the way. That conversation is changing how people in those communities are thinking about their future. And that is partly an antidote to the challenge you raise and the current attraction of this president to some of those communities who feel disenfranchised.
I think the only thing that I'll add though to that is that one of the things that Tom is talking about is this vast network. I mean, we'll call it Facebook, right? Like, and you said before, in cyberspace, no one's really in charge. Well, Mark Zuckerberg's in charge of a lot of it. And as you said,
he's in charge because no one's in charge.
Because no one's in charge. But I mean, look, LeBron James could do something about it, but I think Mark Zuckerberg could probably do a lot more. That's my political statement for the day. But I think Katie, the fact is we are so influenced by social media. We're so influenced by the fact that no matter how often we get together in coal country or in Connecticut to get together over solutions, we are inundated with messages, sometimes fueled by Russian bots. Russian bots don't necessarily want us to be the leader in green energy. And they are telling us that none of the things that we say right here today are true. And that's a big uphill climb.
Well, I think we've, last week was Thanksgiving, right? So how many people had a conversation at your Thanksgiving table about climate change? Great. All right. I think
smart people. Most of you didn't. Yes, I know.
For a long time, those conversations have been at the level of, is it happening? Is it real? Right. I don't know that that's really the question. We're seeing the polling now that people, they do believe it's real, or they see changes happening in their environment, and they acknowledge these are weird times, and they're seeing weird things, and what's driving it. I don't think that we just convince everyone that this is real and it's happening, and then all of a sudden everybody's ready to back up the dramatic things that we need to do to address it. The bigger challenge looming beyond that conversation is aligning, what's the most important short-term need that you are facing, your family, right, versus the things that we need you to do in order to address climate change. That's the disconnect. So at my Thanksgiving table, my sister is a physician's assistant. She works in a pediatric practice, and she just moved to Hartford, which she loves. And so we were talking about, what are we working on? What do you do at work around the table? And I talked about, well, we just launched an electric vehicle roadmap for the state of Connecticut. It's lining up what we need to do to get 500,000 electric vehicles on the road by 2030. We're seeing the battery costs come down. These are becoming much more affordable. Very excited about this, the incentives that we're putting in place, all this stuff. Then my sister's turn. She talks about how she's just moved here from Atlanta to Hartford, and she's struck by the amount of asthma, the families that she's seen coming into her clinic. Hartford ranks 14th, I believe, in top asthma capitals in the country, and it's because of all of the pollution that's coming out of our internal combustion engine vehicles. But for her, I'm like, well, that's great. I've got a solution. We'll get everyone into electric vehicles and take care of it. But she's talking about the families that are in to visit. They're in for a sick visit. They had to call in sick to work. They've missed several days of work. They have unpredictability. It's making it difficult for them to hang on to their job. It's a complete disruptor to their life. That's what they're worried about. These two things come together. As we advance solutions that will help to move public transit buses, vehicles over to electric, that's going to clean up the air that we're breathing in Hartford and around the state of Connecticut. That's going to make a huge difference for the folks who are visiting my sister's clinic, who now have more stability in their lives economically, better health for their kids. It's aligning those policies, the short-term needs, right, the short-term actions and challenges that people have with the long-term need to address climate change. It's how we talk about these solutions and how we help people understand the impact and the relevance that these solutions have to the struggles that they're having every day in the short term, whether that's a family struggling with asthma or some of the families in the community I grew up in who rely on the coal industry for a paycheck. So we have to talk about how does this address, what are you struggling with today, right? And how do we make these solutions help with what you're struggling with?
I know that we're going to get a lot of questions from the audience. So I believe on either side of the room, there'll be somebody with a microphone. Maybe you can hold up your microphone so that people know, and you can hold up your hand. We'll get somebody there. We're also going to be getting some questions here that we'll read off of Twitter and other social medias as I bash social media. I think it's what we talk about, and Lynn, also what we don't talk about. I recently hosted a Connecticut forum about climate change with Gina McCarthy, the former EPA administrator, and some other folks. And we talked about apocalypse fatigue. And one of the problems with enviros, as we called them before, is when we talk about this, we talk about climate change in these apocalyptic terms. And I think people who are just trying to make ends meet don't necessarily want to think about an apocalypse when they have a mini apocalypse at home. And I think, is that some of the things that we need to change, the way in which we frame this conversation as this end times discussion?
You know, the Conservancy goes about everything as a science-informed organization. learning what we can about how people's attitudes are formed and what kinds of conversations make a difference. And one of the things we learned, and by the way, the Yale Climate Communications effort has been really helpful on this, is that talking about apocalypse engenders fear, a sense of paralysis. It doesn't sort of shift that dial for people to take action. What we do find in our focus groups and our polling, drawing from the Yale Climate Communications, is what helps is focusing on solutions, and exactly as Katie said, linking those solutions to multiple benefits. So climate may seem still a little bit different. Health is now. Link those benefits. And there are many other benefits, by the way, that can come also from climate action, especially those investments in nature. The other thing that we find is, again, in that conversation, really emphasizing that this is an all hands on deck enterprise, not a someone else effort. There is something you can do. So sometimes it seems too big, too far, and that also can yield paralysis. So solutions is about, yes, those energy companies shifting to clean energy, but it's also about you in your daily life, the choices you make in turning your light off, driving your car, getting on the bus, or whatever. So we find solutions focus, many benefits focus, yes, you can focus, and you get more appetite for action than if you dwell on the disasters.
As you can see, we have a question here, and the tweeter says, MVP, like similar resilience programs in Rhode Island and Connecticut, are crucial to helping New England become more resilient in a changing climate. I'm sorry, I don't know what MVP is. What's MVP? Does anybody on, this isn't going to be, it's like a quiz show. Does anybody know what the letters MVP stand for? Excellent question then, thank you.
Most valuable players.
Most valuable policy.
Most valuable, I think we're talking about LeBron James once
It
again.
refers to the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It started two years ago.
Oh,
And they've reached over 250 municipalities, going from the bottom up, but connecting with the state programs as well.
Yeah.
It's planning linked with funding for action.
It's incredibly important. We, so next week, December 11th, we are going to be having the kickoff of Governor Lamont's Climate Council. And one of the things that we're focused on there is how do we work in partnership with municipalities in our state to ensure that they have the right tools to know, we have a lot of great science out there, but we need to downscale that science to make it actionable for planners. We need to help people understand how to make the right land use decisions, give them the right tools, and figure out how to pay for it, which can come down to things around your zoning commission, investing. Our land trusts are tremendous accelerants of preserving the types of ecosystem connection that we need to have more resilient communities. So it's a great example of shared learning between our states, so that we see the model in Massachusetts as a real promising one here for Connecticut.
we should have to come up with a snappier name for it. We have a question over here, and hi, what's your name?
Yeah, my name is Peter Orfanos. I wanted to amplify on one of your comments earlier, Tom, and try to connect it with the framing of at the beginning of the meeting, where we were supposed to try to build relationships with people that don't think like the way many of us feel, and reach across to people of different beliefs. And you talked about nature and you talked about God. And one of the things that I found absent in the discussion about conservation and environmental issues is the idea of conservation being a fundamentally conservative value, and trying to preserve nature, enhance nature as a responsible citizen of the earth, as part of an obligation even to our religious values and in some sense conservative values. And again, who is the most environmentally progressive president? Or two presidents, one, you wouldn't think, two Republicans, Teddy Roosevelt and Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon passed clean water and clean air. And so I would like to maybe what are your thoughts about trying to promote these cross the aisle conversations on that basis?
Well, it's a very good point. I mean, there's really a tension in me because, again, in my other hats of covering foreign affairs and the Middle East, one thing I've learned is that for big ideas to scale requires power, okay? If you don't have power, it's very hard to scale sustainably big ideas. And so getting power is important because people who have it can really scale bad ideas. And we should have no illusions about that. At the same time, I resonate with what Lynn was saying, and I try to practice this in my own life. And that's why I began by saying, I began my book by talking to people who I found the crowd that could most disagree with me and try to find a way to connect with them. And one of the things that that I try to do is that, so I try to imagine, well, what if I were talking to a group of West Virginia coal miners, And so I always like to start with what I think is one of the most powerful things in us. It's our attachment to home. And so I could imagine going to a group of West Virginia coal miners and say, I was driving up here and God, this is just a beautiful landscape here. And I came to the town, it's amazing music here. I had a restaurant, amazing food here. I think I know what's really bothering you. It's that when someone comes along and says, hey, climate change is going to wipe out the earth, and if you don't stop mining coal tomorrow, what you don't just hear is something about your job being lost. Actually, what you hear of being uprooted, that your community is lost. Because I think home and community are some of the deepest attachments we have. And I always want to begin the conversation by saying, can we just start by saying, I'm really here to partner with you to figure out how you can stay home in a place you love, in an environment you love, with the friends and family you love, with the music you love, with the food you love, with the culture you love. And let's start there. Now I've got these ideas, and if I can't figure that out with you, then you can throw me out of here, but please understand, I'm not here to uproot you. And I think that's what a lot of people hear. Climate change is coming, you're digging coal, you're dead, you got to move to the city and become a coder. You know what I mean? And that's a really bad message. So I've learned a long time ago, people actually don't listen through their ears, they listen through their stomach. And if you connect to people on a gut level, they'll actually say, you know what, I trust you. Don't bother me with the details. And if you don't connect with people on a gut level, they're always going to say, Mrs. Clinton, could you show me a few more of the details? Okay. Because you just haven't made that gut connection that A, you appreciate what's animating them, and two, that you respect them. One of the things I learned, young people come to me and say, I'd like to do what you do. As a journalist, what do I need to know? So what you need to know, I type fast. I can really type fast. I went to London secretarial school to learn how to type. There's a couple of things I think you need to be a good journalist, and it serves me well in answer to your question. One is you have to like people. So I really like people, and when you like people, they like you back. And what I mean by that is not they like you back, they actually share with you their hopes, their fears, their dreams, their aspirations, the crazy things they think and want. And if you can't hear the music, you'll never be able to play the music. Mm-hmm. But the second thing you need, I think, is you need to be a good listener. Mm-hmm. And it's for two reasons. And the second reason is more important than the first. The first is what you learn when you listen. You learn a lot. All the stories I got wrong were because I was talking when I should have been listening. But second is what you say when you listen. Listening is a sign of respect. And it's amazing what people will let you say to them if they think you respect them. And if they don't think you respect them, you cannot tell them the sun is shining and the sky is blue. Mm.
Yeah, I would like to amplify that a little bit. We find that conservation, yes, absolutely, very much embraced by conservatives, also really across the political spectrum. Indeed, if you ask people how many care about clean water, nature, et cetera, you'll get answers of 80%, 85% think it's important. Our challenge is that it isn't viewed as salient in the decisions they make at the voting booth or in the policy actions that they necessarily support. And so this brings us back to the points that both Tom and Katie have made. Linking those conservation values that people hold across the spectrum to additional values that they hold for their communities, their families, their jobs, their health. So showing that that investment in nature, that investment in climate action, yes, good for climate, but also good for your health, good for these other things that you value in your community. And then I just can't help but add to Tom's comment about listening. You know, our notion as we've embarked on our big climate dialogues across the country is this nice green. And critical to that is respect. And I always think of the words of William Isaacs, who wrote a book called Dialogue. And in that book, he said, and I just love this phrase, it's so poignant, to listen is to develop an inner silence. Now think about it. That means when you're talking with somebody, as opposed to thinking immediately of your rebuttal or how to combat what they just said, really try to listen so you understand better what are those values that are motivating what they're saying, and then find those points of connections and move forward.
We have a question here from Katie Densmore. What companies or industries are already showing promise in using Mother Nature's strategies? Are there any examples that Tom can share? Tom, maybe you first, but I'd love to hear Katie's thoughts on this too.
Well, gosh, there's just it's a valuable question, but there's just a whole group of companies now. I mean, the big thing that's happened in the last 10 years is that every company today, every major company has someone called Chief Sustainability Officer, you know, really thinking about that. I was just in Bentonville at Walmart 2 weeks ago. And I think, you know, Lynn made just a really important point about a carbon tax, is that I wouldn't care if the carbon tax were a penny a ton, 1 penny a ton, because the signal to the market and to companies would be, all right, it's coming. Somebody get me a Chief Sustainability Officer, and what's our carbon footprint? What you see, if you study the history of all these kind of regulations, is how much regulation actually drives innovation. And it goes back to catalytic converters and seatbelts. And the opponents of regulation always have the same story. It goes back to the catalytic converter. You make us install this, and Detroit will go bankrupt. And every time we do it, what happens? They innovate faster, produce the outcome quicker and cheaper. And so I just think sending that signal that carbon is, that's why I said any price, doesn't matter, because the signal will be, we got to go down that path.
Katie?
Yeah, I think that the companies that are, you know, best poised to both not just adapt, but help lead us to, you know, the most positive climate future we can achieve are the ones that are not getting complacent in business as usual. Everything that we do, you know, we have to be questioning the fundamentals of it's always been this way. And I think that goes for regulators who are listening to the insights of scientists and thinking, you know, how do we translate this into our politics and really address the enormity of what we need to achieve, as well as companies thinking about, you know, how long will this investment still be here and be reliable? I had an experience a couple of months ago talking with someone who was eyeing a real estate development that was within the 100-year floodplain. And it is a certainty.
Yeah.
It is a certainty that you know, property will be flooded. And I said, how are you getting any financing? What are your banks saying? And, you know, not an issue, because it's not within the time horizon that they're pricing those investments in. We can't expect that there's some invisible hand or the intelligence of the markets is necessarily going to get us to the right long-term investments for a resilient infrastructure without regulators and voters and members of communities and scientists pushing in that direction. And, you know, after I came away from that conversation, it said to me, oh my gosh, okay, as clear as it is to me that this is not the right place to allocate capital in developing this structure. What are the business as usual experiences that we're living in and working within in our agency, in our state, that I need to question just as fiercely as I would hope those investors would? One example is that we deregulated our electric grid in 1998. And we now rely on a regional grid operator, ICE New England, to make choices about what the next power plant will be that will be developed in our region. It's a 20-year-old construct, but the market design that's in place now for our states has no carbon policy associated with it and no carbon price whatsoever. And it's just producing more and more investment in natural gas power plants. We're at the point where we have to really rethink, is that the right structure for us, you know, and go back to.
Well, and of course, what's so lovely about that is as we see, it's also driven the price of electricity way down. I mean, it's really cheap here. No, it's not. What the hell? Somehow or other, we've messed this up too. We have time for maybe a couple other questions here. On this side, go ahead. What's your name?
Hi, my name's Emma Johnson. I'm a second-year student at the Forestry School, master's student. My question's for Tom. I'm wondering, because places like the New York Times have historically tried to be unbiased or not to advocate in their stories, that in the future, if you see that journalists should have a different role in talking about climate change and take more of an advocacy position in their stories to try and change some of these minds.
Well, we have a big climate team now covering climate change, and I'm on the editorial side of the paper, so I'm not on the news side of the paper, and on my side of the paper, we can say whatever we want. But part of the ethic of how we approach the climate story on the news side is we do not treat these as equal in the least. So there are news organizations that would say, you know, some people say, you know, climate change is real, some people not. It is embedded in the way we cover the story that we, in our climate coverage and our climate teams, do not treat it that way. So that is not true of a lot of news organizations, unfortunately. And we're still struggling. I think the news business in general is still struggling with that. On the editorial page, we can say whatever we want.
You know, I'd just like to add an observation to that. I think there's a sort of mythology around objectivity that what it constitutes is that you have to have, on the one hand, on the other hand, regardless of the facts. And as a matter of fact, when you have 97+% of scientists saying that the climate challenge is fundamental, it's here, it's now, here are the effects, a good reporter is going to report that, and that doesn't mean you need to go and find that 1% naysayer to somehow have a balanced story. That is not what objectivity, at least to my mind, in journalism is about.
We don't cover climate change any differently than we cover gravity. From the science point of view. But your question is very valid, because that's just not the case in every place at all. Yeah. So.
I want to get to a few more questions. One here coming in from Twitter from John. What aspects or signs of climate change have you found capture the interest of people the most? Do you believe it's important to focus on those most compelling indicators of climate change as we reach out to motivate others to help? Katie, maybe you first on this?
Well, you know, clearly people, we're a coastal state, and people that I talk to all the time really connect climate change impacts in terms of sea level rise. We see, you know, there are roads that now are flooding on a regular basis just from nuisance flooding. That's a clear sign of climate impacts. I think one of our challenges as an environmental protection agency is to help people understand the other types of climate impacts that they are experiencing and will experience, that it's not just sea level rise, that we're seeing more intense, more frequent rainstorms, that we're seeing impacts on more invasive species that are killing off more of our forests. We are seeing more frequent high heat days. No one misses that sign, of course, when the thermometer creeps up. But you know, it's really important for us to connect that. But you know, in our agency, we have a lot of programs around environmental education. We see that as really such an essential avenue for helping people understand why it's important to address climate changes when people have an understanding and a connection to their environment. And so whatever the impact is, you know, our message is that it's happening not just along the coasts, but across the state. And so therefore, it's something that all of us need to take seriously.
You know, again, in the framework of, to name something that's own it, I'm a big fan of Hunter Lovin's term global weirding, as opposed to global warming, because it explains, you know, you get a deeply cold day in Washington or a foot of snow and the knucklehead in the White House, tweets, say, where's global warming? So people need to understand what actually means is the weather gets weird in the sense the hot get hotter, the dries get drier, the wets get wetter, the snows get heavier. It has to do with moisture stored in the atmosphere. That it takes you to extremes in every direction. And sometimes people can get caught up with that term global warming. And so I prefer to, frame it as global weirding.
Global weirding. So,
Yeah, a really tricky challenge that we found is up until a year or a couple of years ago, focusing on those indicators, i.e. the weirding, those extreme events, really didn't necessarily translate into people embracing the challenge of climate and the need to act. They would either say, well, yeah, things are weird. The plants are budding out much earlier than they used to, or I'm seeing many more extreme storms, but they would either attribute that to big planetary dynamics or sort of a momentary blip on the screen, and wouldn't translate that into causation. Why is that happening? Now, we are beginning to see that shift. And that means that these places in people's backyards where that weirding is occurring are starting to cause people to say, why is this happening? Why does this keep happening? This doesn't seem like a moment in time. And what do we need to do about it? Not just in terms of enhancing resilience, but getting to root causes. So those extremes are starting to be pretty poignant motivators, but that's new.
I wish we had time for more questions, but we've run up against time here. And I want to thank Lynn Scarlett, Tom Friedman, and Katie Dyke so much. And thank you for the great questions, and thank you for your attention to this really important issue. A big thanks to the Nature Conservancy for putting this event together. As you leave today, there is some information that you can find on the way out that hopefully can help you to get involved. And please continue the conversation at home. Thanks so much.